China has issued a sharp condemnation of U.S. actions in Venezuela. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told reporters, "The United States' brazen use of force against Venezuela and its demand for America first when Venezuela disposes of its own oil resources are typical acts of bullying." This statement comes as Trump's administration presses for a deal with Venezuela to divert oil supplies originally intended for China. China is Venezuela's top oil buyer. The deal in question involves access to approximately $2 billion worth of crude oil. Beijing sees the U.S. military operation and subsequent oil negotiations as a direct challenge to Chinese energy interests in the region. The economic stakes are enormous. Trump has openly spoken of controlling Venezuela's vast oil reserves in conjunction with U.S. oil companies. This comes after arresting and jailing Maduro, whom he has cast as a drug-trafficking dictator in league with Washington's foes. Trump said on social media on Wednesday that Venezuela would use the proceeds from its oil deal with the U.S. to buy American products, including farm commodities and medicine. The implication is clear. Venezuelan oil that was flowing to China would be redirected to serve American interests, and the revenue would return to the United States through purchases of American goods. Vice President J.D. Vance made the administration's position explicit. In a Fox interview on Jesse Watters' Prime Time, Vance suggested the United States would control Venezuela through its oil reserves. He stated, "We control the energy resources, and we tell the regime, you're allowed to sell the oil so long as you serve America's national interest. You're not allowed to sell it if you can't serve America's national interest." This statement lays out the strategy plainly. Control the oil, control the country. Not everyone in Washington supports this approach. Top Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, held classified briefings on Venezuela on Wednesday for the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. Democrats said they wanted more information. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut offered a blunt assessment. He told reporters, "They are proposing to steal Venezuela's oil at gunpoint and use that leverage forever to run the country." This criticism from within the U.S. political system echoes China's accusations of bullying. Meanwhile, the situation in Venezuela continues to develop. Maduro, 63, pleaded not guilty this week to drug crimes when he appeared in shackles in a federal court in New York. His Socialist Party allies remain in power in Venezuela. Acting President Rodríguez is treading a fine line, denouncing Maduro's kidnapping, while also exploring cooperation with the U.S. under explicit threats of further military violence from Trump. Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said late on Wednesday that 100 people died in the U.S. attack. The Venezuela crisis has now become a flashpoint between global powers. China calls it bullying. Democrats call it stealing oil at gunpoint. The Trump administration calls it serving America's national interest. Venezuela's government denounces a kidnapping while negotiating under threat, and Maduro sits in a New York jail pleading not guilty. The battle for Venezuela's oil has drawn in the world's largest economies. China, Venezuela's top buyer, sees its energy supplies threatened. The United States seeks to redirect those resources to American interests. And Venezuela itself remains caught between great power competition. The stakes are measured in billions of dollars and barrels of oil. The outcome will shape hemispheric relations for years to come. The U.S. Coast Guard is now escorting the seized tanker MT Sophia toward American territory. U.S. Southern Command confirmed the boarding occurred in international waters in the Caribbean as part of Operation Southern Spear. The operation involved helicopters and fast boats. The crew did not resist, and no injuries were reported. The vessel is now under full U.S. control. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posted on X that Sophia had been docked in Venezuela or en route there. She described it as one of two ghost fleet tankers captured in back-to-back pre-dawn operations, the other being the Marinara. Southcom released video showing a helicopter flying over the vessel during the operation. The latest tracking as of the evening of January 7th shows the Sophia being escorted toward the United States, possibly to Florida or Puerto Rico. The vessel is not transmitting AIS data, but satellite imagery confirms movement under custody. The Department of Justice is now leading an investigation into the Sophia's crew. Sources say the crew is being investigated for disobedience to Coast Guard orders. Attorney General Pam Bondi warned that criminal charges will be pursued against all culpable actors. She added that federal authorities are monitoring other similar vessels. Bondi stated, "Anyone who does not obey federal instructions will be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent." The crew's fate will be determined once the vessel reaches U.S. territory. 2 U.S. officials confirmed to major outlets that the Sophia departed Venezuela with oil on board, violating the embargo. The vessel was already on OFAC's sanctions list for transporting illicit crude from Russia and Venezuela. The White House describes it as a stateless, sanctioned dark fleet motor tanker engaged in illicit activities in the Caribbean. Officials say the vessel was likely conducting ship-to-ship transfers to evade tracking. The Sophia had been operating under a false Cameroonian flag, technically making it stateless. It had been running dark, not transmitting location data, since July 2025. The White House announced plans to selectively remove some sanctions so the U.S. can supervise the global sale of Venezuelan oil. This could mean confiscating and reselling the Sophia's cargo. The Department of War emphasized the operation aims to crush illicit activity in the Western Hemisphere and restore security and strength in the Americas. Caracas has denounced the seizure as Yankee piracy, linking it to the recent military operation and what Venezuela calls plundering of its resources. Acting President Delcy Rodríguez may address the seizure in upcoming statements. Russia maintains its condemnation, but no new escalation has been reported. The Kremlin says it is monitoring the escort convoy heading toward the United States. The Sophia continues under custody with no disruptions reported. Focus now shifts to judicial investigations and the potential sale of its cargo. American forces have intercepted a massive oil tanker in the North Atlantic Ocean. The vessel, known as Marinara, was carrying sanctioned Venezuelan crude when U.S. forces boarded it. The interception occurred in waters between Iceland and the British Isles. This supertanker had been evading international sanctions for months. It was flying a Russian flag, and it had a history that U.S. intelligence knew very well. Washington's campaign against Venezuela's petroleum exports has reached a new intensity. This ship has operated under multiple identities. Before it was called Marinara, this vessel sailed as Bella 1. Under its previous name, the United States had already placed it on sanctions lists. The designation came for transporting Venezuelan oil in violation of American restrictions. The tanker was also connected to Iranian petroleum shipments. When sanctions pressure increased, the operators changed the ship's name. Bella 1 became Marinara. They believed a new identity would allow them to continue operating. American intelligence services were not fooled. They tracked the vessel regardless of what name appeared on its hull. The Marinara sailed under Russian registration. This flag choice was deliberate. Russian-flagged vessels faced different legal considerations than those registered elsewhere. The operators hoped Moscow's protection would shield them from American enforcement. That calculation failed. U.S. forces intercepted the tanker despite its Russian documentation. The seizure adds another layer of tension between Washington and Moscow. Russia has investments in Venezuela's petroleum sector. Russian companies have helped Caracas evade sanctions for years. Now, American forces are directly targeting vessels flying the Russian flag. The location where U.S. forces seized the Marinara reveals something important. The tanker was captured thousands of miles from Venezuela. It was sailing in the North Atlantic, positioned between Iceland and the United Kingdom. And this route suggests the vessel was heading toward European buyers. Some sanctioned oil makes its way to markets willing to ignore restrictions. The Marinara's operators believed they were safe at such distance from South America. They miscalculated badly. American naval reach extends across every ocean. This interception was not improvised. American intelligence agencies had monitored the Marinara for an extended period. Satellite systems tracked its movements across international shipping lanes. Aircraft conducted surveillance flights to confirm its position and cargo. The operation was timed carefully. U.S. forces waited until conditions favored a successful boarding. When the moment arrived, they moved decisively. The vessel was taken without incident. This level of coordination demonstrates significant intelligence investment. The Marinara belongs to the supertanker class. These vessels rank among the largest ships ever constructed. A single supertanker can transport more than 2 million barrels of crude oil. At current market prices, such cargo represents an enormous sum. Hundreds of millions of dollars were at stake. Seizing this vessel delivers a severe financial blow to those who loaded it. Beyond the immediate loss, the capture disrupts future shipments. Other operators must now reconsider whether the risks are acceptable. The Marinara employed standard shadow fleet methods. These techniques have become common among vessels carrying sanctioned cargo. Ships disable their tracking transponders to disappear from monitoring systems. They meet other vessels at sea to transfer oil between tankers. This ship-to-ship movement obscures where cargo originated. Frequent name changes confuse identification efforts. Registration switches between flags of convenience add another layer of confusion. Paperwork falsification disguises what cargo the ship actually carries. The Marinara used many of these tactics. None of them prevented American forces from finding and seizing it. Washington had already formally designated this vessel before the physical seizure. Under its Bella 1 identity, American authorities had placed it on restricted lists. The designation cited Venezuelan crude oil transportation. Iranian petroleum connections added to the charges. Despite being publicly identified as a sanctions violator, the ship continued operating. Its operators relied on the Shadow Fleet network to evade actual enforcement. They assumed financial penalties would be the extent of American response. Direct physical seizure proved them catastrophically wrong. The Marinara capture continues a pattern from recent months. In December 2025, American forces seized another tanker called the Skipper. That interception occurred closer to Venezuelan territorial waters. Caracas responded with fury, labeling the action as piracy. International maritime law became the subject of heated debate. Washington dismissed Venezuelan protests and continued operations. Additional vessels, including the Centuries, faced detention around the same period. Each seizure established precedent for the next. The Marinara represents the latest and most dramatic escalation. Venezuelan authorities have condemned these interdictions in the strongest terms. Government officials describe American actions as piracy on the high seas. Under international legal definitions, piracy involves unlawful vessel seizure. Caracas argues that U.S. operations meet this standard precisely. Washington offers a different legal interpretation. American officials cite sanctions violations and drug trafficking connections. They characterize the seizures as legitimate law enforcement. Neither side shows willingness to accept the other's framing. The legal arguments will continue in various international forums. American naval power in the region has expanded dramatically. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford now operates in Caribbean waters. This warship represents cutting-edge American military technology. Its air wing can project power across vast distances. Escort vessels traveling with the carrier add additional capabilities. Destroyers provide missile defense and surface warfare options. Cruisers offer command and control functions. Support ships ensure the strike group can operate indefinitely. This concentration of naval force sends an unmistakable signal. The Gerald Ford deployment is one element of broader military expansion. Coast Guard vessels have increased Caribbean patrol activities. Navy surface combatants monitor critical shipping channels. Reconnaissance aircraft maintain constant watch over sea traffic. This buildup supports the tanker interdiction campaign directly. It also serves as general deterrence against any Venezuelan response. The military presence ensures that seizure operations face no effective resistance. Venezuela possesses no naval capability to challenge American forces. These operations fall under a coordinated military initiative. Operation Southern Spear targets illegal commerce throughout the Western Hemisphere. Sanctioned petroleum represents a primary focus area. Venezuelan, Russian, and Iranian oil all face interdiction. Drug trafficking networks also fall within the operation's scope. The Pentagon has devoted substantial resources to this campaign. Naval assets, Coast Guard cutters, and intelligence systems all participate. The Marinara seizure demonstrates the operation's effectiveness. Operation Southern Spear reflects broader strategic objectives. The Trump administration has emphasized Western Hemisphere dominance. Multiple pressure tools target Venezuela simultaneously. Military operations removed President Maduro from power. Economic sanctions restrict normal commercial activity. Maritime interdiction attacks alternative revenue channels. Each element reinforces the others. Together, they constitute a comprehensive pressure campaign. The Marinara seizure fits within this larger framework. Understanding the Shadow Fleet clarifies why these seizures matter. This term describes a network of vessels carrying sanctioned cargo. The ships are typically older tankers nearing the end of their operational lives. Their owners accept higher risks because the profits are substantial. Countries under sanctions, Venezuela, Russia, Iran, rely on this fleet. Normal shipping channels refuse to handle their petroleum. Banks will not process payments. Insurance companies will not provide coverage. The Shadow Fleet bypasses all these obstacles. It represents an economic lifeline for sanctioned governments. For Venezuela specifically, the Shadow Fleet is essential. American sanctions have devastated the country's oil export capacity. Legitimate international shipping companies refuse Venezuelan contracts. The global financial system has largely cut off Caracas. Without the shadow fleet, Venezuelan oil would have almost no path to market. The government depends on petroleum revenue for basic operations. Every tanker seized directly reduces available funds. The cumulative effect threatens governmental functionality itself. Russia has reacted to these seizures with visible anger. Moscow describes American actions as state-sponsored piracy. Russian officials argue that international maritime law has been violated. They reject Washington's legal justifications entirely. More significantly, Russia has raised the possibility of naval escorts. This would mean Russian warships accompanying tankers as protection. Such escorts would dramatically complicate American interdiction efforts. Seizing a vessel under Russian naval protection risks direct military confrontation. Neither side wants actual combat, but the escalation trajectory is concerning. Russian naval escorts would transform the situation fundamentally. American forces currently interdict tankers facing no military protection. The seizures are essentially unopposed operations. Russian warships would change that calculation entirely. Would American forces attempt to board a vessel while Russian sailors watch? Would they risk firing on Russian personnel who intervene? These questions have no easy answers. Both militaries would face pressure to avoid backing down. Miscalculation could produce catastrophic consequences. The Trump administration offers specific justifications for these operations. Officials emphasize connections between Venezuelan oil and drug trafficking. They argue that petroleum revenues fund narcotics organizations. Corruption within the Venezuelan government receives similar emphasis. The official position, these seizures target criminal enterprises. Disrupting oil shipments disrupts drug networks. Venezuela and Russia categorically reject this characterization. They see resource theft disguised as law enforcement. The rhetorical battle continues alongside the physical operations. Venezuelan government messaging has been consistent and forceful. Acting President Delcy Rodríguez connects the tanker seizures to recent military action. She frames both as elements of a unified aggression campaign. The military attack that captured Maduro targeted political leadership. The tanker seizures target economic foundations. Rodríguez describes this as a strategy of plunder. The goal, according to Caracas, is seizing Venezuelan resources. This narrative portrays the country as victim of imperial theft. Venezuela interprets these events through a specific lens. The government argues that Washington seeks regime change above all. Military action removed the president. Economic warfare through sanctions and seizures weakens state capacity. Together, these tools aim to collapse the existing government. A compliant replacement would grant American companies access to oil reserves. This interpretation frames resistance as national defense. Every Venezuelan is asked to see themselves as under attack. Interestingly, Venezuelan officials also claim economic resilience. Rodríguez has spoken of growth despite the blockade. This messaging serves important domestic purposes. It tells citizens that foreign pressure cannot defeat them. It positions the government as successfully defending national interests. The tanker seizures complicate this optimistic narrative. Each lost cargo reduces actual available revenue. The gap between rhetoric and reality continues widening. The practical impact of these interdictions is substantial and growing. Every seized tanker eliminates tens of millions in potential revenue. The confiscated cargo will never reach buyers willing to pay. The vessel itself faces seizure and potential sale. Crew members may face legal consequences. Beyond immediate losses, uncertainty spreads through the entire network. Other shadow fleet operators must reconsider their willingness to participate. The risk calculation has shifted dramatically against carrying Venezuelan oil. The seizures produce effects beyond the specific vessels captured. Throughout the shadow fleet, operators are reassessing their exposure. Some will decline Venezuelan contracts entirely. Others will demand substantially higher compensation for the increased danger. Shipping routes may change to avoid interception zones, adding costs and delays. Insurance becomes more expensive or unavailable. Recruiting crews grows more difficult when sailors face potential prosecution. The entire logistics infrastructure supporting Venezuelan exports is degraded. These operations mark a significant shift in sanctions enforcement methodology. Previous administrations emphasized financial penalties. Sanctions violators faced asset freezes and banking restrictions. Companies lost access to dollar transactions. Individuals found themselves unable to travel or conduct business. Physical seizure of vessels at sea remained relatively uncommon. The Trump administration has changed this approach fundamentally. Direct interdiction has become standard operating procedure. Ships are being taken, not just sanctioned. The legal foundations for these seizures generate serious debate. International maritime conventions generally protect vessels in international waters. The United States argues exceptions apply to stateless ships. Vessels violating sanctions may forfeit normal legal protections. Critics contend that America acts as unilateral judge and executor. No international court authorized these specific seizures. Washington responds that domestic law provides sufficient authority. These arguments will likely reach various legal tribunals eventually. Meanwhile, operational reality continues regardless of legal debates. The Marinara interception proves a critical point about American capabilities. This tanker was seized far from the Caribbean or South American waters. It was taken in the North Atlantic, near European shipping lanes. The message is unmistakable. Distance from Venezuela offers no sanctuary. American intelligence can track shadow fleet vessels anywhere. American naval forces can reach them regardless of location. No route is safe from potential interdiction. The Marinara seizure must be understood within broader context. President Trump has deployed pressure against Venezuela across every domain. Military force captured the head of state. Diplomatic isolation restricts international support. Economic sanctions strangle normal commerce. Maritime interdiction attacks the shadow fleet alternative. Each pressure point reinforces the others. The cumulative effect vastly exceeds any single measure. Venezuela faces comprehensive assault on every front. The campaign against the shadow fleet will certainly continue. The Marinara will not be the final vessel seized. American forces have demonstrated capability and willingness. Intelligence assets continue monitoring suspicious tanker movements. Naval resources remain deployed and ready. Additional interdictions are virtually certain in coming weeks. Each successful seizure encourages more aggressive operations. The tempo of enforcement shows no sign of slowing. The strategic picture has become unmistakably clear. Washington has launched total economic warfare against Venezuela. The Marinara, formerly known as Bella 1, was intercepted in the North Atlantic. American forces seized this Russian-flagged supertanker between Iceland and Britain. Intelligence services had tracked it for weeks before the operation. Earlier seizures of the Skipper and Centuries established operational patterns. The USS Gerald Ford Carrier Group provides overwhelming military superiority. Operation Southern Spear coordinates the entire interdiction campaign. Moscow condemns what it calls piracy. Caracas denounces imperial aggression. Washington describes sanctions enforcement. Regardless of how nations characterize these events, the outcome is identical. Venezuela's capacity to export petroleum faces direct assault. The Shadow Fleet, previously a reliable sanctions evasion mechanism, now constitutes a trap. Vessels are being taken, cargoes are being confiscated, operators confront existential risk. This economic strangulation accompanies military and political pressure already applied. Maduro remains imprisoned in Brooklyn. His government's tankers face interception across the world's oceans. The Trump administration displays no intention of reducing pressure. Venezuela confronts siege conditions on its territory and across international waters. The international community watches as events unfold.